Here to share with us on this topic, please welcome Dr. Vincent Nguyen.
Thank you very much for staying to the end. And I have the distinct advantage of going after all these wonderful speakers, and I have a lot to fill. And thanks so much for the beautiful stories. My story today is about living with serious illness and the gift of palliative medicine. You know, I'm going to share with you my perspective in caring for people living with their serious illness for the last 20 plus years. What I speak today is from my perspective as a physician, as a palliative care specialist, and what I have to say, here's my disclaimer, I don't speak on behalf of Hoag, nor do I speak on behalf of the St. Joseph Health System, but for me as a physician and as a witness, caring for over 20,000 patients at least over the last 20 years. And when I talk about the gift of palliative medicine, I'm not talking about the gift that I bring to patients and family, but it's more of the gift of what palliative medicine has done for me as a person to help shape for who I am. And it helped me to see and witness the face of mortality and see how people die with grace and dignity. And their stories, as you've heard from Stephanie Packer, I mean, these are the kind of stories that we hear often, helping people live to the very end of their natural life. And you hear about the generosity, the heroic acts, the nobility, and the inspirational pieces that people give for us. So I'm going to start with the first slide. From the book, Tuesdays with Maury, it's a memoir about a newspaper sports columnist recounting the time he spent with his sociology professor. And the theme within that book is about happiness, acceptance, communications, love, openness, and values. And I just love the quote. It basically says, once you learn how to die, you learn how to live. Now, the objective, I have 3 pieces I want to share with you today, and I have 20 minutes to succinctly talk about this. The first is to articulate the role of the benefit of palliative medicine and how it benefits the seriously ill and their family. The second is to describe how palliative care can help the sick and their family discover meaning and purpose at the end of their life. And the third piece is to understand how physician-assisted suicide is inconsistent with the duty of the physician. So what is palliative care? You hear this word tossed around so many times, and here's a simple definition. It is specialized medical care for people living with serious illness. We're not talking about death or dying. We're talking about living. And so how do we help people living with serious illness? It's about caring for people from reliving treatments as well as truly caring. And it's delivered by a group of medical professionals, not just made up of doctors, but there are nurses, social workers, and chaplain. And the idea, the model of this care is very much person-centered. The purpose is to reduce pain and symptom burdens, attending to the psychological as well as the spiritual needs. We need to understand that the person is just more than the body. It's more than the physicality, but it's the whole personhood, the emotional, the psychological, and the spiritual. And oftentimes in medicine, we focus so much on the physical component that we forget about the other component of who the person is. I'm going to share with you, oftentimes I hear people get confused what palliative care is and what is hospice. And I want to share this slide with you that I have kept this slide for about 15 years, and I keep continuing to tweak it. So what you see here from the left axis here, from the presentation to death with the disease progression, the role of the physicians is to provide disease-modifying therapy. That is to see what we can to slowing down the disease. And the other piece we need to be doing is to provide symptom control and supportive care. It's about treating, so what is palliative care and how does it fit in here? Palliative care is about treating the disease while caring for the person. So as you can see, as the person's illness progresses through their disease trajectory, symptom control and supportive care tends to rise. the proportion underneath that treatment, the focus is on symptom control and no longer on the disease as much. And where does hospice fit in all this? Hospice is part of palliative care. It's that one component defined by Medicare as someone having a prognosis of less than 6 months if the illness follows its normal course. And all we're saying as physicians is that it's the probability, the likelihood. We don't have a crystal ball to tell you exactly when you're going to die, but we have an inkling. If your illness follows its normal course, we're looking at maybe 6 months or less. So hospice is that one component of palliative care, and that's how I started my career. Right after residency is I wanted to do hospice. My office was my patient's bedside. How I get there is through my car. And one of the things I've learned through when I was in medical school, I did the spiritual exercise, the Ignatian spiritual exercise with the Sisters of St. Joseph. And it was the afternoons I would come and give my reports for that week. I discovered that it's about helping people, trying to discover what it is that we do in life, what gives us meaning, what is my call, what is my purpose in life. And that is to truly be present with the patients and the family as they suffer. And I discover that every time I enter a patient's home, even if I were to go enter a patient's bed in the hospital, go into the bedside, that room becomes the chapel. That home becomes the church. And that hospital bed that the patient's lying on is the altar. And when I start seeing that, I begin to see my work as something so much more than just a physician going out and see the patient, but I'm tending to the person as a whole. Not just take care of their pain and their suffering, but also attend to their family's needs, the psychological, the emotional, and also the spiritual need. And I get to play chaplain without having to go to seminary. So part of palliative care, too, is we don't forget about caring for the patient and family at the point of death. But there's the healing that continues to proceed after the patient dies. And we have bereavement services after that. And we heard this again, the world mortality rate, yes, it continues to be steady at 100%. Okay, but the thing is, what we see, though, is that between 2015 BC to 2015 AD, is that people are now sicker before they die than ever before. And as a result, it is harder to die today than at any point in human history. So we become a death-denying culture. With modern medical advances, we see that death now becomes more like an option. We see that death is a failure, not as life's natural conclusion. And it makes it even more difficult when you have a bunch of people who excel in academics. We don't like to get B's, we like to get A's, and that's how we compete to get into medical school. But death is a big F, is a big fat F, and that's failure, and we cannot handle that. So in terms of doing that, we're not very good as physicians in preparing our patients and family to the inevitability of the dying process. We want to give hope. It's a lot easier to tell our patients, I got one more treatment for you. As an oncologist, my colleagues, we got first line, we got second line, we got third line, fourth line, fifth line. But we always got to keep going. And we forget about, let's sit down and talk. Let's talk about what's important to you. Let's talk about your values. Let's talk about your hopes and your fear. And so we don't talk about that. So people in our community are unprepared, and they're fearful of the process about what it looks like. So these kind of uncertainties create a strong desire for us to have some measure of control. And this is where physician-assisted suicide or physician-aided dying, whatever you call it, is an option that provides control, or at least a peace of mind. So what are some of the common fears? And controlling the fears is pretty much part of this legislation appeal about assisted suicide. Often patients tell me that they fear becoming a burden to their family. Most of them are white Caucasian men, very independent. They're the patriarch of the family. They don't want to be a burden. They hate the loss of autonomy or inability to enjoy things that they used to enjoy. There are people who are not afraid to die, but the suffering that they perceived, or either real or perceived, that they think achieves it. The problem with this is that most people are not aware of what palliative care is, what kind of services are available to help the patients, the people in their journey of their illness. And these are things that I need you to go out there and talk to your doctors and say, I want to learn more about what palliative care is. And you should ask your doctor what it is. Maybe they can surprise you. If they talk to you about, it's a death service, it's for people who are dying, tell them that it's wrong. Palliative care and hospice is about life. It's about how to help the person live whatever time they have left, giving them the best possible life possible, giving them the best care, and that's what we're called to do as physicians. Talk about compassion. Compassion is to care for the person as a whole. And this is what palliative care is about. It's the heart of palliative care is to meticulously paying attention to the person's physical, psychological, psychosocial, and spiritual distress. Part of the work that we do is about helping patients and their family to discover the meaning and the purpose of life. So what is the purpose? What is the meaning of life? I thought it was kind of interesting. The meaning of life is to give life meaning. And the purpose of life is a life of purpose. So what is it like to discover meaning and purpose at life's end? And I would propose to say the meaning of life's end is to give life's end a meaning. And the purpose of life's end is a life's end of purpose. And this is what we do in palliative medicine. This is what we talk about compassion and caring. Often people are afraid of suffering. They're afraid of losing control, having pain, having discomfort. It's not unusual for patients to say, I hurt so much, I'd rather die. Even when surrounded by their family members, accompanied by their loved ones, suffering is very much isolated. It's within that person. So there's a social isolation, even though they're surrounded by people. The loss of image, of self-image, the existential angst. What is the meaning of all this? I don't quite get it. Maybe the best thing for me is just end it all. But part of what we do in palliative medicine is about providing hope. Hope that, we're going to do everything we can to manage your pain and your symptoms. Do not be afraid. We have the technology to help you. And it's our hope that improving the mood, the patient's depression, treating that appropriately, we can return the hope back to the patient to give them some sense of quality of life. And we help for patients to understand that life serves a purpose and holds enough meaning for continual existence. In my field of work, it's not unusual for patients to come to me after their physician says, I have nothing more to offer you. And so I usually kid around with my patients. I said, here I am. I'm nothing. I'm here to help you. So to provide hope, I had a gentleman who came to see my office several months ago. I wasn't there, but he's talked to my social workers, and he says, I want care. I need to see Dr. Nguyen. And I was not in town that week, but he ended up going on hospice. I got a call from the hospice a week later saying, Dr. Nguyen, can you help us? I said, what is that? We got a patient at home. He said he has a loaded gun. He wants to kill himself. I think we need to call APS. I said, let me see him. So I drove to his house, sat down with him. I remember the moment. He lives in a beautiful home. He was in his 70s. And he looks at me, he said, Doc, I'll give you a large chunk of money if you help me die. I said to him, I didn't say how much. I sat down with him and asked him, what are your fears? Tell me why you say that. tell me what's going on within yourself. And he says, I don't want to be in pain. My doctors have said, we focus so much on treatment that I'm suffering in pain. I can imagine myself dying in anguish and pain. And I told him, I can help you. I can help you take care of your pain. I also told him that I'm going to take a line that was just said recently. I told him, your life was not mine to give, and I do not have a power as a physician to take that away from you. But I will give you a commitment that I will do everything I can to help you. And I spent an hour and a half with him. And part of the work that I did with him is this 5 tasks of dying. How to help to heal in the face of no cure. And we know that, at the end of life, there's just more than just physical healing. It's also healing of those emotional wounds. And the beauty of what we have in the Catholic Church is the confession, the sacrament of confession. But I also apply that to the work that I do, is we talk about forgiveness. Forgiving frees the soul. It's also the ultimate gift that we give to ourselves and to our loved one. So I utilized that piece and said, these are the things I want you to do. First is to ask for forgiveness. This is a gentleman who's been married several times, I think at least 5 times, 4 children from 4 previous marriage, and he has a wife currently. I said, I'm sure there are things in your life that you had some regret. And he said, yeah, I do. I told him, why don't you utilize this time, whatever time you have left, and ask for those forgiveness, and also offer the forgiveness. I also look at his wife, and I looked at him and said, you're married to a beautiful woman. Have you ever had a chance to say thank you to be with you for all this time in your disease, in your treatments? Did you get a chance to say, I love you, to your wife and to your children? And this is also an opportunity for you to say goodbye, to attend to things that need to be done, saying what needs to be said. And for him at that moment became a healing time, because his wife later called me, and she said, Dr. Nguyen, in all my life, in my years of marrying my husband, he was so intense, I never sensed a sense of relaxation, a sense of just letting go when you mention those words. And these are not my words to give. I think these were the words that I can give to any patients, anyone. And this is I talk about the whole embracing, dying, and living. And so that helped him heal. And each week I would come back to see him. I titrate up his medication. And I would check in with him, and a hospice nurse would give me an update. And I came out to see him the following week, and he came up, he opened the door, and said, Doc, that was great. Thanks for taking care of me. And I kept continuing to see him until one day on Sunday, his wife called me, and she says, Dr. Nguyen, I think my husband's dying. So I said, I will be coming by. So on a Sunday afternoon, I drove to the home, and he was laying in bed, non-responsive, and his family, his children from various parts of the United States came in to be with him. And he was non-responsive, at least what I thought. And I looked down and I said, Mr. X, I promise you that I'm going to do everything I can to take care of your pain. And I kept my promise, and I did not abandon you. You go peacefully in your journey. And as we began to leave, he started flickering his eyes. He lifted up his hand. He started gruntling. He started to grunt a little bit in something I don't understand. And his children were standing. He said, Dr. Dean, I think he's trying to say thank you. I said, I bet he is. And I walked out of the room, and I talked to his wife for a little bit. He died an hour later. And for me, it's just a privilege to see the transformation that occurred for not just this one gentleman, but this is the latest case that I had. It's had such a huge impact on my life. And it came just about the time when Bishop Van asked me to be a part of all this. So what can we say about physician-assisted suicide or physician-prescribed? And we heard it many times today, is that it's incompatible and conflicts with a physician's obligation. The art of healing should always remain at the core of medical practice, and the role of the healer involves providing patients with hope and renew aspiration, however tenuous or temporary. If I were to convert this into a non-physician speak, it's like you giving a loaded gun to a loved one and say, out of compassion, I'm giving you this gun, but don't shoot yourself until I leave this room. And this is what you're asking of us physicians to do when we prescribe a lethal dose to kill our patient. We wouldn't do that. In my little debate, or not debate, in my little shenanigan here with all these wonderful speakers, I spoke about the suicide debate as being a sentimental subject, and it is. But we also hear so many times this word dignity, and there's a difference between the intrinsic dignity and the attributed dignity. Attributed dignity is something that individually or through social standing, we're judged by how we are in society, what we dress, how much money we have, how much we're worth, what is our value. But the intrinsic value that we have is just being human. It's inalienable from the core being or from the essence of who we are. So as human, we're worthy of great respect and must be free from exploitation, manipulation, and slavery. I think part of this SB 128 is about exactly the opposite of what dignity is. It's about exploitation, manipulation, and slavery. We often hear the word semantics and euphemism, physician-assisted suicide. It's basically redefining to mean what you really want them to mean. It's an attempt to manipulate the true meaning of what it is. We can't use physician-assisted suicide because it has this negative, distasteful, violent connotation to it. So we hear the word physician-assisted suicide, physician aid in dying, death with dignity, and the right to die. But let's go through each one of those. Physician-assisted suicide is not a medical treatment. You cannot see this as a treatment. It is killing somebody. Killing is not a treatment. It's still assisted suicide. So giving a person a lethal drug to end their life is not an extension of what I do as a hospice and palliative care physician. And what about the word death with dignity? It means, it implies that the sick, frail, or physically dependent people are not dignified. So, therefore, you need to die before you become sick. The indignity of needing assistance to the bathroom does not justify suicide. So what we're saying here, too, is that disabled people or those at life's end can be cared for in such a way that allows them to feel respected, worthy, and valued. What about the right to die? The Constitution. We do have the constitutional right to refuse life-prolonging treatment, and we heard that many times today. This is very true to our Catholic teachings as well. But I want to take it one step further. I don't see at the end of life the treatments that we provide for patients, I don't necessarily see as life-prolonging. I begin to see them as non-beneficial, death-prolonging, organ-sustaining, or rather burdensome treatments. There's a difference between being allowed to die and having a doctor intentionally ends one's life. And what about medical ethics and a Hippocratic oath? We know that euthanizing and healing are intrinsically incompatible. So there is a big difference between killing and foregoing burdensome treatments. The duty of the physicians, why we wear this white coat, why we take care of patients, is we have the duty to safeguard human life. The purpose as a physician is to benefit the sick, unburden their fears, alleviate their suffering, not the person who is suffering, and non-abandonment. So, with my last slide, dying with dignity and a gift of palliative care. It is when we embrace death as part of life, which is not ours to give or take, that we enter most fully and intimately into caring for patients at the end of life. And I have been privileged for over the last 20 plus years to be there with the patients and their family. And I really feel that palliative care offer a compassionate and medically sound alternatives to assisted suicide. Thank you very much.
Okay, we've had a big day and we've talked about a big issue. We've heard from the nurses, the doctors, the theologians, the philosophers, and if you happen to be Father Spitzer, you're all wrapped up into one. Now, what do we do about SB 128? To share with us on the practical political steps related to this legislation currently before our state Senate, please welcome Mr. Greg Walgenbach, Director of Respect Life, Justice, and Peace for the Diocese of Orange.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Californians Against Assisted Suicide Coalition that you've heard about already today, I want to give a brief description of where we are right now on the legislation and then give a couple pieces of action that we can take home with us. Currently, SB 128 has passed through the Health Committee. It's passed through the Judiciary Committee on a 5-2 vote, and now it's in the Appropriations Committee. The Appropriations Committee is made up of 5 Democrats, 2 Republicans. The chair of the committee, who's a Democrat, has not yet weighed in on the bill. One of the other Democratic members is a co-sponsor. The 2 Republican members, one has voted against it in committee and the other one has indicated a no. So the coalition is focusing their efforts on these Democrat members in that committee as well as on the Senate floor. The legislation has to leave the Appropriations Committee and go to the floor of the Senate by no later than May 29th, and it needs to move out of the Senate by June 8th. So that's a little bit of the timeline. All indications are that it won't be heard in the committee most likely for at least another couple weeks. We're starting to get into May. So that's kind of the timeline that the legislation is on. And I want you to really take note of these websites up here. These are your go-to websites for the advocacy, for information, for articles, for a lot of the pieces that you can use. NoAssistedSuicideCalifornia.org is the coalition website, the coalition you've heard about, which is made up of disabilities rights groups, people of faith, other secular patients' rights organizations, others. CACatholic.org is our California Catholic Conference of Bishops website. If you're not already signed up for the Catholic Legislative Network, I strongly encourage you to do so. That's where you can connect on all of our advocacy that we do as a church through Sacramento in our state and beyond. But if you sign up for the Legislative Network, you will get very current updates, and you will get current notices when is the best time for you to send in your email, your letter to our legislators when it will make the most impact. And then we have our Diocese of Orange website, rcbo.org, and then Life, Justice, and Peace is our office at the diocese, and we have a page filled with materials and all the resources and websites that will be helpful for you as you bring this information back to your parishes, back to your communities. Bishop Van has encouraged us to look at 2 ways to respond. You've heard a lot today. You've heard a lot of wonderful information. One of the things I wanted to point out is that the opponents, the supporters of this bill, want to make this an argument of religion versus a secular argument, or a libertarian freedom versus an authoritarian peace. And I want to make sure that we go home today really taking in what you've heard. We haven't heard a lot of authoritarian arguments. We haven't heard a majority of religious arguments about this issue. We've heard from doctors, we've heard about constitutional freedoms, we've heard about life, we've heard about other pieces, and so that's a false dichotomy that I think we need to reject as we move forward and do advocacy on this issue. The 2 aspects that Bishop Van has really called us to lift up, the first one is the prophetic action, the prophetic response. And that is speaking truth in our communities, speaking truth to our legislators, getting involved in this legislative advocacy. As I mentioned, we have action alerts through the coalition, the No Assisted Suicide, ca.org. There's an action alert that you can send a letter in through there, through our Catholic Legislative Network as well. We can also, and just remember that our legislators, they tally up the number of emails that they get on different sides of the issues, and they weigh that heavily when they make their decisions. So we need to have all of us in our communities, in our parishes, sending in these letters to our legislators. But we also need to call, we also need to write letters, we need to do the various pieces of response that you've heard from today. The second side of our response that Bishop Van has called us to is the pastoral side. And we've heard a lot about that today as well, pastoral care. And I want to just leave this word with you, presence, right? This is about presence. For Christians, we just finished celebrating Easter. We just finished reading about the story of the disciples on the road to Emmaus, who were faced with their worst fears realized in an end-of-life situation in the worst possible terms. We're leaving that situation despondent, depressed, hopeless, all of these issues that we talk about, and then suddenly that stranger is on the road with them, present to them. And again, it's not religious or non-religious. They didn't even know it was Jesus. But someone was present to them in the midst of that situation. And there was a revelation in that presence. And you don't need to be a Christian, you don't need to be a person of faith to know the power of presence in time of crisis, the power of presence in time of death, in time of sickness. So we really need to lift that up. As people of faith, we need to really think about how do we increase our level of pastoral care. How do we come alongside our priests and our religious in the amazing work that they do with those who are facing end-of-life decisions, those who are facing terminal illness, sickness, and how are we as parishes, how are we in our communities working to do everything we can to be present to those who are in need. So our prophetic action, our advocacy legislatively, and our pastoral presence to those in need. And it's not just a job for pastors, right? It's a job for all the people of God. It's a job for every human being to be present to other human beings around them. Thank you once again for being here today, and we do have a table outside. If you'd like to get more information about our office or any more details on any of this, we're happy to provide that for you. Thank you.